Scientists from the University of the Witwatersrand and the University of Cape Town are launching a clinical trial to test whether the childhood vaccine for measles, mumps and rubella can protect frontline healthcare workers from COVID-19 or reduce the severity of the illness for those who are likely to become infected. The research team leading the trial points to growing evidence that suggests that the MMR vaccine may have benefits that may offer protection against such diseases. It could broadly boost an individual's immunity and may prevent infection from SARS-CoV-2 for a limited period. For more on this, we're joined by one of the trial's national principal investigators, Professor Sinead Delany-Moretlwe, a research professor at the Wits Reproductive Health and HIV Institute. Thank you very much, Professor, for joining us. So tell me, what's the thinking behind using the MMR vaccine for COVID-19 prevention specifically to protect frontline workers?
Thanks very much. The MMR vaccine is a vaccine used to protect us against measles, mumps and rubella, but it contains a weakened virus which can be used to train the body's immune response to recognize infections and to strengthen that response when they encounter new infections. And we think that this may be helpful in preventing COVID-19 in healthcare workers. We also think that some of the antibodies produced by the MMR may also work against SARS-CoV-2. So these two strategies could be useful in preventing COVID-19.
So mumps, measles and rubella seem very far removed from COVID-19, but is there a correlation between the vaccine's effect on respiratory systems?
So this is not a vaccine that we think has specific effects on SARS-CoV-2. What we think it does is train the body's immune response so that it is strengthened in fighting any infections. And there's some evidence to support this from work done in childhood vaccines that are other live attenuated vaccines like BCG, the vaccine used against TB, which show that people who've had these vaccines are protected against a broad range of infections, not just the ones they're directly effective against, and that this effect could also potentially be beneficial for SARS-CoV-2. So we have some evidence that there are people, when they received this vaccine, had lower rates of SARS-CoV-2, but we really need to do the trial to prove that this is effective and how effective it is.
So does the MMR vaccine form part of the standard immunization schedule for South Africa? And if so, would a vaccine administered many years ago still protect someone from COVID-19 today?
That's a great question. So the vaccine is currently administered to young children, and most healthcare workers are likely either to have had the vaccine or to have had measles, mumps or rubella itself. We think these effects are likely to be short-lived, so sort of in the order of 2 to 3 years. So that's why what we would be doing is offering people a booster vaccination to see whether that trains the immune response and protects them against SARS-CoV-2 in the relatively short term, while we wait for specific vaccines to be developed. We also think that this strategy could be used as a complementary approach to specific vaccines. So particularly in the elderly who don't mount great immune responses, preceding those vaccinations with an MMR may help boost their immune response to the specific vaccines.
So this is part of a global trial, correct?
That's correct. The CROWN trial is being conducted by institutions in the African region, but also in Europe and the US. And the specific funding has come from the South African Medical Research Council, but also from the COVID Therapeutics Accelerator, whose goal is to kind of advance the development of therapeutic interventions against COVID. And they were particularly interested in our collaboration because we have managed to identify a network of African scientists in South Africa, Zambia, Zimbabwe, Uganda, and Ghana who will all participate in this trial.
So pending the outcome and the results of the trial, could this MMR vaccine ever be used on a large sort of public scale to address COVID-19 should a specific COVID vaccine not become available soon?
Yes, that's precisely how we envisage this. We hope that we'll have results from the trial in the next 12 months. And if it's shown to be an effective strategy, we see it as a really important interim measure. It's a relatively inexpensive vaccine. It's simple to administer. It's safe. We have a very long safety record of about 50 years. And so we think it's imminently scalable, particularly in countries in low and middle income country regions where access to a specific vaccine, which might be more expensive, may be more difficult and may take some years.
So apart from its use for the broader public, the thinking behind this is also that it would assist medical frontline workers specifically because they are more at risk, and that would bolster the medical system, correct?
That's correct. We are focusing the trial primarily on healthcare workers, and that's because we think they may be exposed at work where they may have repeated exposures or they may receive a higher inoculum. But also we observed, particularly earlier this year, that healthcare workers were exposed during transit to and from work, or also in their communities, or when they're looking after family members. And it's really important that we find ways to protect healthcare workers so that we can sustain the pandemic response, but also so that we can sustain some really other important healthcare programs, such as our TB program, our immunization program. And we've learned a lot how, many of those programs have been rolled back because of the impact of the pandemic.
Thank you very much for your time. That was Professor Sinead Delany-Moretlwe, a research professor at the Wits Reproductive Health and HIV Institute.